This is a Chronicle podcast, bringing you ideas in the service of medicine.
Greetings and welcome to Shear Listening Pleasure with your host, me, Neil Shear. I'm a recently retired academic dermatologist. Over my career, I have been inspired by my many colleagues and trainees who are dedicated to helping people with major life-altering skin conditions. Some people don't recognize dermatology as a real medical specialty. Oh, but is it ever? From the many stories of patients and providers, I hope we can inspire others. We will travel across Canada to delve into inspirational contributions to improve the quality of life of others. Very few specialties have as many diverse diseases as dermatology. So without any gory photos, just friendly chats, we will take you into a world behind the scenes, a world of caring, compassion, and inspiration. And of course, I want to give a very special shout out to our sponsors supporting the podcast from Amgen Canada. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
With knowledge beyond measure, discussions you will treasure. It's sheer, 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 listening pleasure.
Well, welcome to the podcast, and I'm Neil Shear. I'm very pleased to have Rachael Manion on the line to talk to us about the Canadian Skin Patient Alliance. And she's not the first person in that position, but it's certainly evolved, I think, tremendously under her leadership. And I guess I wanted to know from her, and thank you very much, Rachael, for doing this, is to know, how did this whole, before you started even, what's the history that you inherited? And then how do you see what you want to do moving in the future? And how long have you been doing it for, et cetera? Can you bring us up to speed on that?
Sure, Neil, I'll try my best. And thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this podcast. The Canadian Skin Patient Alliance was founded 15 years ago with a lot of support from the Canadian Dermatology Association. We still have a really good relationship with the CDA today. The vision behind the CSPA was that there should be a place where all skin patients, anybody who's affected by a skin, hair, or nail condition, can go and can get support, can be connected to resources, and that this community has somebody in their corner, somebody that can help them out in an advocacy capacity, whether that's a health systems advocacy issue, whether they are struggling with trying to find a general doctor for themselves or figure out who might have the kind of dermatology expertise in their region that they most certainly need to access. So at the CSPA, we focus on developing resources to help educate folks about different skin conditions and other aspects of living with a skin, hair, or nail condition. We have our signature publication, which is the Canadian Skin Magazine, and that's available in English and French. We put out a new issue 3 times a year, and it's full of information on different aspects of living with a skin, hair, or nail condition. So we have information in there on specific conditions. We have information in there about different kinds of issues that are coming up in sort of a topical way. And we have all kinds of opportunities for our broader network, the CSPA's broader network of affiliate members, to sort of showcase some of the experiences of people in their communities and the work that they do to support them. We do a lot of advocacy, whether that is preparing patient input submissions for the labyrinthine process that a drug follows to get from being approved by Health Canada for being widely used in the country according to a certain indication, all the way through to actually reimbursed for patients. So covered by a private health plan or covered by a public payer. So we do a lot of work on access to treatment issues. We also have been turning our attention in recent years, Neil, to a lot of the mental health impacts of living with a skin, hair, or nail condition. We know that stigma and discrimination is really alive in the community. People who look different or who have a condition that's very visible often end up on the receiving end of looks, comments, and different kinds of treatment. I speak regularly to a woman I know in the prairies who was fired because of her psoriasis. Now, we know that's not supposed to happen, but we also know that it does. So that's kind of an area where we are turning a lot of our attention to. And we've had the good fortune to work with Dr. Dana Lee Bagley. She's a registered clinical psychologist in many provinces across the country to actually build some resources for folks on what to do to address things like anxiety and depression, chronic disease distress, which is actually different from depression and anxiety, and how to handle unwanted remarks or advice, how to talk to their partners, how to do all of these kinds of things that some people struggle with in their daily lives. So those are a lot of our sort of external facing work, Neil. And then we have a lot of things happening sort of they're considered more internal and a lot of supports that we try to provide to our 31 different affiliate members. So those are other organizations here in Canada that support a specific skin, hair, or nail patient community. I know you've had Sonia on here, Neil, and she's such a tremendous advocate. We're so fortunate to be able to work with her as an affiliate member of CSPA too.
Right, for the SJS Canada group. And she's a great model of that. And
yeah, she's amazing.
And I think from your group too, you've really shone a light in places to give her directions to get, are there funds you can get from the feds? Are there other opportunities that you can do? So it's a good example, I think, where you've got a terrible disease like toxic epidermal necrolysis, and you think, but people have never heard of it. And, when you start to meet the survivors or the relatives of survivors, you start to see not only what the impact of the disease is, which is horrible, but also what the impact is when people feel they've actually being heard and there's something somebody could do or just be there to support them. Myself, I was on the Pemphigus Foundation, and once we got a great drug for that, it disbanded. And that was a win, I think, because that was great to be able to do that, because in the beginning, it was just a lot of desperation. Nobody knows what we have and nobody knows how to treat it. But when you say we, and you're talking about more than 30 groups, when you say we, is it you in an office and you're an octopus and you've got all these people all over the place and you've got 16 screens in front of you, or what does we mean?
Well, we are so fortunate at CSPA to have a really good staff team. So we have 4 humans who actually put things together, develop resources, run all the communications channels, and set up supports for our affiliate members. We also have a board of patients and people who are committed to the mission who come from across Canada. They kind of intersect with the skin patient experience in different ways. We have over 70 volunteers, including a lot of dermatologists, and medical students really like to work with us, and we love working with them, and other humans who just believe in what we're doing and want to help. So those are the people that get the work done. But as an alliance, we're here to help support the whole community. So sometimes we're talking about patients and caregivers. Sometimes we're talking about work we want to be doing in collaboration with the people who provide dermatology care. Sometimes we're talking about other distinct organizations that serve parts of the skin patient community. But because we're an alliance, it's really our job to bring together all those pieces in a way that can help patients the most.
So, there are all these other groups too that you're, rare diseases, et cetera, but they're not just focused on skin. And thinking back when you went into this, I'm not sure. So why did you come to the Canadian Skin Patient Alliance? What was the attraction for you basically to come into this system?
I'm so happy to be here. I've benefited from so many different kinds of experiences in my career. I've been a patient since birth. So I was born with a congenital issue, and I've been interacting with health systems across this country as a patient my whole life. I was trained as a lawyer, and I loved the intersection of law and health policy. So when I articled, and then in my early years of practice, I actually worked on different files that were run by Health Canada. So I gave advice on assisted human reproduction, novel technologies, drugs and devices, and research involving humans, which was an incredible experience. There's not really any other place in the country, I should say, where I could have done that work. So I really liked that. That was really about using legal tools to create policy. That's what I really enjoyed about it. After I left the Department of Justice, I went to work for a consulting firm where I helped to build a lot of the health policy monitoring and advice that we as a team there were giving. And when I was there, I worked with a lot of different patient organizations. I worked with different pharmaceutical companies, and I really got to know this system a little bit more intimately. Once you're trying to affect change and achieve an objective, you get to learn things and you get to learn the details about things and the mechanics of things in a way that is really quite unique. So I feel very fortunate to have benefited from that. And it was actually through that work that I became aware of the Canadian Skin Patient Alliance. So when they were recruiting, I reached out and had some conversations there. So I was really happy to bring that kind of professional experience to the organization and to the role. But even before I went to law school, I worked in a pharmacy as a pharmacy technician. I worked in a medical clinic as a medical office assistant. So I've been kind of in and around the health system for more than 2 decades. I've done a lot of volunteering with street entrenched communities. I used to run an art program at a needle exchange in Victoria where I grew up. This is just kind of the space where, we all know there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but this is also a space where I get a lot of energy. So I feel really fortunate to be here.
In the earlier days, they had the sort of a scorecard going across the country and seeing how different provinces were accessible, et cetera. I was involved with some of those, and you meet with the people who are the decision makers, say in Ontario, and they smile and say, yes, that's really a good point. And they do nothing. And then you've got issues of what I would say is discrimination against skin disease, where choices are being made, maybe at CADIT or approval levels, that basically are saying, well, you know what, we have lots of issues. We have to get drugs to lots of people. We don't need to worry about skin problems. Am I being oversensitive about that? I mean, or do you feel there is maybe not the urgency that, if you said, oh, it's for heart disease or cancer, and if you mention cancer and skin disease, they go, well, yeah, but that's cancer. So then we sort of care about it. I just feel that myself and my colleagues, especially when you go to Pan-Canadian, I always call it pricing alliance, but it's the pharmaceutical alliance. When you go there, I mean, in a small group, they're very sensitive. And actually, I have experience where they've been very productive. And it goes back to CADIT, et cetera. But to put us through that dance in the first place, the models that we have for approving drugs for cardiac diseases would be basically the same as the ones we would do for skin diseases. But there's a totally different perspective of payers and decision makers at all levels, whether it's Indigenous groups, et cetera. Everybody seems in dermatology to be, I think, underserviced. And I've had people say things at meetings when I was on the provincial group in Ontario that I think they wouldn't have minded if it was made public that they were so, disgracefully against skin disease. But I was absolutely shocked that they said, well, we have these other diseases that really need treatment. We don't need to worry about skin disease. So are you running into that? Is that still an issue?
We are. And I think that what that looks like can be really different depending on the indication or the community that it's serving. So, for example, we hear across the board, people don't say this to us, but we know it's part of the mix, right? This is just a rash. Or for people who have acne, rosacea, it's really just a cosmetic thing. There's no real disease pathology that we need to better understand and actually treat to prevent, complications or other issues in the future. So we see often there's this intersection with cosmetics and seeing things as cosmetic issues when they're not. And I wasn't in this role 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when that was really starting to change for psoriasis. I also am the executive director of the Canadian Association of Psoriasis Patients, so I'm very alive to the current landscape. But, the sort of treatment revolution that happened many years ago for psoriasis, that's what we're now starting to see in atopic dermatitis, for example. And we hope we start seeing that in epidermolysis bullosa. We hope we start seeing it in vitiligo and alopecia areata, all these other kinds of areas. We hope that we're going to see similar revolutions there. And I think it was challenging back in the day for the psoriasis community to express what it's like living with psoriasis, not only what is going on with their skin, not only the comorbidities of that and how, unmitigated inflammation can actually impact other organ systems and how, people can get fired because people think they're contagious in the workplace, all these other kinds of things. It was really about the community figuring out how to get together and express that has turned that around. And we have some strong leaders in Canada in the eczema community. And I know that will come, but I see a lot of similarities between some of those conversations now and the downplaying that can happen with skin disease that I suspect were happening years ago with psoriasis. I see that now happening with atopic dermatitis. And it's much easier for us now to articulate why psoriasis needs to be treated. And the fact that, because now we have studies and things that will show, or that have shown, that even if you live with mild to moderate psoriasis, you can have significant impacts on your life. But we have the benefit of years and years of research and investment into that space in order to answer a lot of those questions. And we are seeing that happen in real time in eczema and atopic dermatitis. We're going to see that in other areas, I hope. But it can be really challenging. So, in psoriasis, it was sort of like, it was just a rash. And then in atopic dermatitis, that's really a childhood illness. Like most people grow out of that. It's not a big deal. I had itchy arms when I was a kid and I'm fine now. Like it's that kind of mentality. So that we do see a lot. It's not uniform. Not everybody sees it the same way. And the more that I talk to decision makers and policymakers, the more people are comfortable saying, I live with psoriasis. I live with eczema. My sister has that. It's horrible for her. And that's where we can start to really make those human connections and help people understand that it's more than just the skin, right? For a patient, it's not just what's going on with their skin, which is critical to understand and critical to address. It's also what's going on for that person. Is that person getting any sleep? Because are they up all night itching? There's a lot of open questions. I think we're starting to answer the questions a little bit about kids who are growing up with itching disorders. Eczema is sort of a classic example because it's a lot more prevalent. And if they're not sleeping and their brain's not, they're not developing as a tiny human in the same way. And what are the impacts on that? So I think that it's up to us in the dermatology community and the skin patient community and those who support us to do that digging and to be able to better articulate those experiences, because that's where I think we're really going to start to see that shift.
That's very clear and very thoughtful, and I appreciate it. The kinds of things we've seen from, the way patients have been treated in the past is just sinful. And even in groups that theoretically should be making thoughtful decisions about what's funded and should understand that there's more than 3 diseases or, things like that. They always seem to think it's a trick or we're trying to fool them by doing that. I think we've come a long way in developing the idea of there is cosmetic dermatology, that's one world. But then there's really what I have called advanced medical dermatology, where we're seeing people who are far sicker. A rheumatologist is seeing people with sore joints and things like that. That's something. But sometimes what we're seeing, these people are really going to die and suffer on their way to their death. And yet people don't understand it. And I will say, when people call us in the clinic, they want to be seen right away. And they come in with a tiny spot and they go, well, you've seen worse? Really? And it's just a thing, and if you show pictures, people turn away. They don't want to see it. It really is interesting. And working with the patient groups, which I have as well, you really, really feel for them. And I'm embarrassed that our country, which holds itself in high esteem, is still one of the countries that treats skin issues not as well as they should. So what do you need? What are the tools? Are there still tools that you need? I'm going to use the term tool, but I think you know what I mean. Are there more people, more volunteers, more money? Like, what do you need to try and get this fixed?
Oh my goodness, Neil, if I gave you my wish list, we'd be here all day. I think that the way that we're going to see actual change here is incremental, because there are so many facets to these issues. There are complex policy issues here. That does not mean that they're impossible to tackle or impossible to change. I was very fortunate to be able to travel to attend the world's first Congress on Rare Skin Diseases in June of this year. And one of the things that was so fascinating to me, it was held in France. And in France, they're geographically based, they have networks for rare skin diseases that are formed around the European Reference Network, the skin networks, thematic groups. So they've taken the 1,000 plus rare skin conditions, they've grouped them in according to these themes of how the diseases are functioning. And then that allows them to tackle it a little bit better, it allows them to sort of grow some expertise. It was fascinating. And I think that, I know we're seeing with rare diseases in general across Canada, we know that there's a lot of work that's being done to try and tackle this a little bit better. the conversation that the federal government is having with stakeholders around the rare disease drug strategy is really focused on how to make sure that when there are drugs that are working for patients, patients are able to access them because they're priced so differently than drugs for common diseases, which is in and of itself, I think, probably a whole other podcast episode, Neil. But when we look at rare skin diseases, that's actually a considerable chunk of the number of different rare diseases that are out there. And wouldn't it be great if we were able to harness and connect a lot of the expertise that we have throughout the country? We're such a big country. Wouldn't it be great if we were able to sort of organize that better so that if somebody saw a patient and they weren't sure what was going on, they could tell that there was something pretty significant happening, they could be able to figure out how to get that patient connected with the care that they need, whether that's some provider to provider advice. So whether that's like a primary care provider having a conversation with somebody who has expertise in that kind of medical dermatology and then treats the patient based on that, or whether that's the patient actually seeing that dermatologist with that precious expertise. We still have to sort of unpack what makes the most sense. But there are models out there for how to help connect individuals with people who have that certain kind of expertise in dermatology to make sure that they have all the information that they need, that they know what to expect. When we as a society know what to expect, there's a lot of rare diseases we don't yet. And there's a system in place that can help bring them to that expertise. And so they can be cared for and managed appropriately. So that's just rare. So I think that there are a lot of different aspects to this. And I'd actually love to pick your brain. I know you're the host, Neil, but I'd love to pick your brain a little bit. And I mean, when it comes to complex dermatology patients, are we in Canada set up really well to care for complex dermatology patients? Is it a real lottery? Does it just depend if you walk into Sunnybrook or if you walk into a rural hospital? Like, from your perspective over the years, what was that like?
Well, I start off in not saying we're underpaid, but we are compared to, the amount of time and complexity. It does take a lot of time, and dermatology is generally a fraction of what other specialties get. So if you're a rheumatologist person and has a sore joint from playing tennis, they get, a full type of thing. Somebody comes in with blistering disease all over their body, we get 50%, let's say in Ontario, for that. So despite that, though, I will say there's a new generation, if you will, of dermatologists coming up now who have been trained and who have taken us years to get these other dermatologists interested in these diseases and have them on the examination. And if it's going to be in the exam, then you've got to pay attention to it. And then to not only know there's a disease like this, but then to use new treatments, which is another step. Oh my God, you're using this new treatment in a patient, you're going to kill them. But no, we know that we can do this well. It's a good news and bad news story about the clinical trials that are being done in Canada. They're a spectacular contribution, hitting, as Barack Obama would say, we're hitting above our weight. We do spectacular studies in Canada. The reason we do is because people can't access drugs. And so the only way they can get them is to be in a clinical trial. So on one hand, hooray, we're doing high quality, really world-class clinical trials. And we really stand out in the world in that. But darn it, it's because patients can't get these drugs in many ways. Now, in brand new drugs, it's different. In brand new drugs, something that hasn't been to what would be called, say, a phase 3 or a third level to actually have them treated. So we're doing that. We're doing it great. There are groups across the country and networks which are working well. In terms of the new generation, just speaking to people recently to see what they're doing in terms of using artificial intelligence and other ways to really quantify and understand what the patient, whoever that is, anywhere in Canada, for example, that you can actually provide something to them. This, I really feel like this is coming, and it's really going to make a big positive impact because of the passion of the dermatologists who are doing this. They really are committed to it. And it's like, when I think about some of these people, I mean, I knew them when they were students, and now they're running, very complex programs. And I think, you know what, they're going, this is what I was meant to do. I really want to change this. I want to make it so anybody, anywhere, in any province can contact me, for example, whoever it is, and we can move them forward in a very productive way, the way you were describing. So I think the media, the virtual visits, thanks to COVID, we ended up with all these virtual visits and trying to understand those in a visual disease. It's hard. It's not like I need your blood pressure. I need to see your skin. And, the pictures they send you are useless. So that's a challenge, but it does help in remote areas, et cetera. So we're learning a lot. And I think AI is going to have, the artificial intelligence is going to have a big impact, but people are doing it and are very close to coming up with really great, I think, products. So I'd like to think the next 3 years even, doesn't have to be longer, because, things change very quickly. But I would like to think in the next 3 years, and having, industry partners really helps, because I've always felt myself, and I'm sure you see that too, that the industry's on my side in terms of caring about patients with skin disease, and the new products and getting access to them and making sure they're safe, et cetera, is quite a broad thing. But certainly medicine's changing in many ways. And I think derma is going to be able to do something very special. So I'd like to be a little bit optimistic about us doing better, but especially with what the Skin Patient Alliance is doing, I think you've got a clear head about it, if you will, and you know what you can do and can't do and what needs to be done and prioritizing. One of the interesting experiences for me was meeting with the payer groups. And there's different groups across the country that do this, and they just have their own payer meeting. Now, they would allow industry maybe to sponsor a speaker. They've got a new drug for something, et cetera. And I've done a few of those. It's been interesting to see, from a national perspective, and the kind of issues they face. One was, for example, you talked about atopic dermatitis. One issue there was, when we did the atopic dermatitis, I brought a patient in, a very articulate adult who worked in a very high-level job, and later in life developed very severe atopic dermatitis, and nothing helped her until she actually got a biologic. But she had to go through a lot of hoops to get the biologic. And I brought her to the meeting, and she explained to the group what her life was like before and after. That was great. The next time we had a meeting about atopic dermatitis, it was about adolescence. And we talked about all the impact on, say, the mother or father who can't work because they're trying to deal with this kid, or because they don't get sleep, et cetera. And someone in the audience asked a very good question that said, but the parent is my client, the kid isn't. I think she referred to it as the life that she was looking at, and the insurers were paying for was the mom or dad who are working, but not the child. So how do we deal with that? I said, I don't know, that's your job. I'm just a guy, I don't know.
Yeah, it's really different depending on whether you're having the conversation with a public payer, like a government drug plan, or if you're having the conversation with a private payer. I was actually just talking to one of our affiliate members about this just a couple of hours ago, in fact. And, when you're talking with a public payer, you're much further ahead when you're able to focus on health outcomes, because that government is also paying for the health system. So if we're able to manage and care for and treat somebody properly, and they stay out of emergency rooms, they stay out of hospitals, they have better quality of life, they're able to participate in their community. There's the way that they look at those benefits is really different than if you're talking to a private payer, and the conversation tends to be much more effective if you're able to explain how to make that person more productive, which sounds really reductive, but when you're able to say, like, having an adequate treatment or an optimal treatment keeps this person from being really tired. It keeps them able to focus. It keeps them from needing to go on disability. And it makes it more likely that they'll stay with you for a longer time. Like, you have to have like two different conversations. If I went in and talked to a private payer and I was expressing how it keeps people out of emergency rooms, that's not theirs to concern themselves with. They're not paying for that. That's not the objective of private plans, right? The role of private plans is to be part of a compensation package. So it's for recruitment and retention. It's not really anything beyond that. And then the way that decisions are made, and there's so many cooks in the kitchen when you talked about a private plan, right? You've got people who are designing it, who think of it as a product that they're selling to a market. And then you've got the employer who buys it. Like, we're an employer, right? So no employer spends a great deal of time looking at their benefits plan. They want advice from somebody who's seen more of them than they have. They want the context on that. They want a recommendation, and they want to move on. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, to influence those decisions, but that happens somewhere else. And, as an employer, like, if you're looking at the average workforce in retail, that's completely different than if you're looking in a restaurant, or if you're looking in manufacturing or in healthcare or whatever. Like, they just have really different considerations. So it can be tricky to have those conversations, and you have to sort of be able to understand that context in order to more effectively advocate for patient, to have optimal care and treatment in those environments.
We learned a lot about employers when the biosimilars were coming out. And I probably spent about literally 5 years of meetings and seeing where all the biosimilars were made, et cetera. At the end of the day, we all felt that we just, biosimilar or not, we need to have drugs that work, and we were very happy to have them. But it was interesting to learn, like you said, that the benefit for somebody who's going to be working for a company that's going to be making decisions about as a payer, what they're looking for is a parking spot, they're looking for a dental, and it's different than we thought. So we all as a group learned a lot about it. One thing that also came up over time was that some of these new drugs that came out, to see how different provinces worked on this, or different other payer groups, could be other national pay groups, et cetera. And I have to say, I was impressed with one of them in particular because it was sort of dynamic. It wasn't black and white, yes, no. It was like, okay, we'll do that. But if it isn't working at such a time, then here's what the next stages are. And if it is working, great, we find out. And the things I learned was it was more humane. Instead of just saying, no, you can't have oxygen. I'm sorry, what are you talking about? It was more humane in saying, look, here's what we think is best, and it's economical compared to the next step. So if the cheaper one works, great, it's a win. But the beauty of it was, in my mind, after about 2 years, these payers had data. They knew whether their money was invested well or not. They knew that there were X% of people who stayed on that drug. How much do you get into the minds of payers like that? Or can you? Or does it change? That's the other thing too. Mind you, when I was in a provincial committee, the people who were running it would change a lot. And when you look at the government people, they would change a lot, except the process went on anyways. It had nothing to do with them. They just repackaged the information depending on whether they're, left, right, central, whatever their look is supposed to be. They made it look like they were doing something different in this new guise, like they just changed their hat. But really nothing changed. It was the bureaucrats, if you will, who were making decisions and continue to make them. What do you see coming up, next in that area? Is there more that we can do? Can we give awards to the groups that do the best?
I wonder what that ceremony would be like, Neil. I think, though, that, you're really making the case for evidence-based advocacy. Like if you can go in and you've articulated what it is that your community is looking for or needs, why they need it, and how you think that policymaker, that decision maker can address that, why you think that option is the best option, or maybe you come with 2 or 3 and you say, we don't know what is the best option for you guys, but we know that these are all paths to get my community's needs met. That's where you can start having a lot of discussions that aren't an exchange of talking points, because many people fall into that flow. That's, I think, really normal. Some people, when they're meeting with policymakers and it's not something that they do every day, they can feel really nervous, totally normal and a totally human reaction. And we have this way as humans of sort of contorting the other person that's in front of us into something that's more than just another human having a conversation. So, when you're able to come with that kind of evidence, then you're able to start building that foundation, and your ask with the context around it starts to look a lot more reasonable. And when you have that kind of an evidence base, you can show that if you're dealing with different political parties, if you're dealing with a change in staff or in the people who you're chatting with, and you can keep going back to that and saying, we've asked our community, we asked in this way, we did this kind of environmental scan, we formed this kind of white paper, or whatever it is that you've done, whichever sort of vehicle you want to use for that. But it's a lot harder to argue with a foundation of evidence. And that's, I think, as a scientist, like, imagine you're very familiar with that. That's how we have the whole discipline of medicine, right? Is there's this idea that you should be able to figure out what's going on and repeat that and understand how to apply that in a new situation. It's very similar in that way. So I think that's really essential. And that's a lot of the work that we've been trying to do, certainly in recent years at CSPA. So we have some advocacy reports on specific conditions. So in 2020, we put out one on HS. Just earlier this month, we put out one on acne in collaboration with the Acne and Rosacea Society and Dr. Jerry Tan. Very fortunate to work with them, and 2 individuals who live with acne. So one is an adolescent and one is an adult, and they were able to inform our whole process using their experiences. We are working on one on atopic dermatitis that we will be releasing later this year. And that's really exciting for us because we're able to articulate what patients are going through. What's it like trying to get diagnosed? What's it like once you're diagnosed? How many different treatments have you tried? And like, what did you actually want the treatments to do? What are your goals? And these kinds of reports, they can be very lengthy and they're very dense. There's lots of graphs. So if you like graphs, this is the report for you. But the kinds of information that people have been generous to share with us can help us have conversations around access to primary care, access to specialty dermatology care, access to medicines, access to an interdisciplinary care team. They can help us share words of wisdom from people who've been there with these conditions, with people who might be newly diagnosed. So they kind of serve a lot of different purposes, but it's one of the ways in which CSPA is contributing to what's out there in the world about the patient experience in Canada. So we're doing those. We're going to continue to do those on a fairly regular basis. We're looking at how to wrap our arms around rare skin disease, given the nature of the country, given how many there are, and making sure that we are able to take advantage of this moment in the formation of policy, because it's really important moments that are happening now. We know we need to continue to dig into mental health and support people with what's going on for them and what they're experiencing. So those are sort of some of the special projects that we're working on. And we're also in discussions about how we want to start articulating wait times, not just wait times, but access to dermatology care. So sometimes the bottleneck is actually getting a GP. So many people in this country don't have GPs. Walk-in clinics don't like to refer you because then they kind of have to follow you, right? So that can be tricky for people. You mentioned virtual care. We're doing a project in collaboration with the Canadian Association of Psoriasis Patients and the Canadian Psoriasis Network. We're working with AXDev Group to try and really dig into what virtual care can bring to psoriatic disease care. So that's both psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis. So it's a little bit different. CSP is involved in that because we want to be able to look at that data and that work and see what might make sense in other skin patient communities and kind of make those connections. So we know those are big open questions. There's lots on the go. And honestly, Neil, I haven't even talked about what we're doing with patient engagement in research with the Skin Investigation Network of Canada, because we're embedded in that as well to help really, stimulate a lot of interest in medical dermatology and in answering some of these questions for people.
That's terrific. There's so much going on, and I really appreciate that somebody with your skill set is in that position, because you need somebody who can keep all, these balls in the air, if you will, and understand how it all comes together at the end. And I think really, and I hope you'll keep doing this for many years to come, because I think the next 3-4 years is going to be very exciting for people with skin disease. I really think this is, whatever it is, we can do better. And we're very fortunate to have a lot of better drugs and a better understanding of skin disease and the whole world of diseases. So, I think there's just so much there. And the people coming out, I think so many of them are committed to, our trainees in dermatology are really end up hardcore committed, which is just great.
There's a lot of passion and compassion.
Passion's a good word, and compassion. That's a good phrase then. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of passion and compassion. And they really just blows me away. I'm really so happy to see that, because often it was just, it's you alone, but no, it's not like that. There's a lot going on there. Well, there's a lot more we could probably talk about, but I think we've covered a lot of ground. And I want to thank you, Rachael Manion, who's the Executive Director of the Canadian Skin Patient Alliance. And the skin patients obviously are very lucky to have you in that position, because the growth that you've shown so far and the focus. I think if people feel this is too diverse, it's wrong. It's actually, for our world, very focused just in many areas, though. And that works too. So thank you so much for taking your time today to talk with us. And I look forward to doing it again sometime in the future to hear what's happening. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention that we didn't touch that you just are going to walk away and go, oh, I meant to say this?
I think that there are a lot of opportunities for people who care about these issues to get involved with patient organizations, whether it's the CSPA or whether you have a specific connection to a skin patient community where there's a formal organization. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and, whatever your background, we need you. We need you because we can't do this without you. We have a lot of work ahead of us. And the more we're able to collaborate, the more that we can get done.
Thank you again. Keep at it. We really appreciate what you're doing.
Thanks, Neil. And I'm happy to talk about anything and everything anytime. So you just give me a ring and we'll have another great chat.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this episode of Sheer Listening Pleasure, please do share it with your friends and colleagues. On our next episode, Neil will chat with another guest from the world of dermatology. To subscribe, go to www.derm.city or find the SLP podcast at Apple iTunes, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, Spotify, or, really, wherever you get your podcasts. The producer is Jeremy Visser. Research for this episode came from Cristela Tello Ruiz, John Evans, and Kylie Rebernick. Support for this podcast comes from Amgen Canada. Amgen Canada serves dermatology patients throughout Canada by delivering vital medicines to them. In addition, Amgen contributes to developing new therapies or new uses for existing medicines, in partnership with many of Canada's leading healthcare, academic, research, government, and patient organizations. Today, tens of thousands of Canadians use Amgen medicines every year. Learn more at www.amgen.ca. Send your comments to slp@chronicle.org. Until next time, be well.